The Thames Ditton Floods, 2014. In February 2014, London and the southeast of England was hit by one of the biggest floods in the UK's history. Thames Ditton was one of the worst affected areas as the River Thames burst its banks. This had been caused by continuous rainfall from storms that had blown in from the Atlantic. The storms just kept coming, which made the river rise and rise until it burst its banks, and on top of that, any overflowing water would fill up the drainage pipes, which in turn would release even more water into local communities. Early 2014 was one of the wettest winters the UK had ever faced on record since 1910, and furthermore, it was one of the warmest winters on record. The lowest average temperature was about 9.9 degrees Celsius. These storms caused £1.4 million worth of damage to property. Many lives were ruined from this flood. People's houses were flooded, boats were turned upside down, tilted on their sides, and some even sunk. Now, there have been plenty of floods in the UK before 2014, but risks of them have increased by 20% in the last 20 years. By 2050, scientists believe that over 1 million properties could be damaged or destroyed by these floods. There have been a lot of theories on why floods have been on the increase, but the main one I can come up with is due to climate change. It is also caused by a decrease in Greenland, such as forests and fields, due to the growing population. That makes more demand for more solid ground and stones like concrete and limestone, which don't absorb water, which means that the water will just run off. The government have dispatched rescue boats to help get civilians out of areas worst affected by these floodings. The intense London thunderstorms, 2018. This next weather event isn't as bad as the terrible flooding, but it still makes me uneasy about the future. In May of 2018, the whole south of England was hit by intense thunderstorms. London was the worst affected out of all these areas. The first storms were caused by hot weather that was being pushed in from France, and the second batch was from the UK and had developed in the south and the Midlands. The average temperature in England was 11.5 degrees Celsius, which is about 1.5 degrees higher than what it was from 1981 to 2010. The Met Office did issue a yellow weather warning for rain and thunder during that week. A lot of people would be like, oh, it's normal to get thunderstorms in the summer, it's no big deal. But these storms were unusual. There was 40 to 50 millimeters of rain in 1 hour, as well as 15,000 lightning strikes in areas that got the worst of these storms. On top of the risk of lightning, there was also flash flood warnings throughout the time that these storms were forecasted. There was also a report of a roof being destroyed in Essex near Colchester by lightning at 1:30 a.m, where it took 4 firefighter crews and 3 hours to put out the flames. Luckily, no one was in the house when the lightning struck, but it did leave a lot of exterior and some interior damage once the fire was put out. There have been a few instances where buildings have been damaged from storms in the future. For example, in 2020, a few properties were struck by lightning in Cornwall when a thunderstorm struck then. But back to 2018, as well as lightning destroying a roof, there was also flash flooding in Selly Oak, where the roads were overflowing with water. A lot of rubbish bins had been knocked over and cars were waterlogged, as well as people who were trying to drive in this were only advised to travel if it was absolutely necessary, because it was almost impossible to drive in the water. To end things off, I want to bring up a topic that I think needs to be addressed. A lot of people assume that it's mainly the government's fault that they aren't doing anything to make changes to our emissions. But I did a bit of research, and it turns out that they have been doing quite a bit to make changes. For example, they have a goal to reduce the overall greenhouse emissions by 100% in 2050. The Climate Change Act of 2008, where they limit how much carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. There is also certain technologies that have been approved. For example, a CO2 capturer which captures carbon dioxide and sends it down to the core where it gets trapped in limestone once it hits its boiling point. Now, I'm going to be 100% honest. I think we're the problem. I think this because we don't do enough to reduce our carbon footprint. And I think that is because we can't embrace change. We have become so set in our ways and comfortable with the stuff we use to clean ourselves, all the food we eat, and all the electricity that is used in the household. I also feel like some people don't take the situation seriously. And believe it or not, some politicians actually thought that climate change was a hoax. And I think a lot of people, for some reason, decided to believe that. And my question is, why? We have an average carbon footprint of 10 tonnes per person in the UK, and considering there are about 67 million people, that's quite a lot of CO2 to release into the atmosphere all at once. I just think we need to do something before it's too late, because there is still time to make changes. We just need to make the right choices to save this precious planet and secure the future for the next generation after us.